Hey, it's Brewbird. I'm here in Vancouver at Container Brewing, and I'm with Dave Dako, my old brewing classmate from KPU. So Dave, can you describe yourself and what we're making today?
Yeah, I'm Dave. I'm the head brewer here at Container Brewing. Today we're working on a sour wheat beer. It's inspired by traditional German Berliner Weiss, but we've taken it in our own direction with some unique additions.
And will you do the honors, Dave?
엉클어진 방 침대에 누워 핸드폰만 보며 또 하루를 보내 오늘 같은 날 산책이라도 다녀올까 But I feel so lazy Yeah, I'm home alone all day and I got no...
Today we're making a sour wheat beer at Container Brewing. This beer is a play on a traditional Berliner Weiss, which is a cloudy sour beer that's usually around 3% alcohol by volume. It's a regional variation of the wheat beer style from northern Germany, dating back to at least the 16th century. This Berliner Weiss-ish beer is a light, refreshing sour beer that has a bit of a higher ABV than a normal Berliner Weiss, which is usually 3.2 to 3.5% ABV. It's flavored with bitter orange peel, crushed coriander seeds, and blueberry blossom honey. Dave came up with this recipe near the start of the COVID shutdowns and fittingly named it Be Right Back. This video features some new brewing terminology, so if you're unfamiliar with brewing terms such as Warloff or the grist hopper, you might want to watch the Brewing Dad's Lager Beer video first, which I've linked above and in the description below. The mill is located high up here, so you need to climb a ladder to get to it, which is a bit of a pain. Bags of grain have to be forklifted up to this level in order to be milled. For this beer, we're using 360 kilograms of grain in total. 50% is Pilsner malt, and the other 50% is wheat malt. Once milled, the grain moves through the spiral auger and into the grist hopper above the mash tun. At the start of the brew day, Dave rinsed the mash tun out with hot water to warm it up. The water was then flushed out to the drain to rinse out the pipework. Next, he'll fill the mash tun up with some hot liquor from the HLT, the hot liquor tank, and we're aiming for a strike temperature of 70 degrees Celsius. During this time, we'll also add in some calcium chloride and calcium sulfate, which are brewing salts to help lower the pH of the mash. Once Dave has added in 250 liters of foundation water, he'll start mashing in his grains. Our target mash temperature here is 64 degrees Celsius.
그날 밤 생각 없이 난 너에게 전화했어 묻고 싶은 게 많아 I got so many questions 오랜만이야 라는 말도 못한 채 Are you fine fine 이런 말만 대묻네 너가 잘 지내고
Unlike barley, wheat has no husk on it to help with filtering out the wort, which is why we're adding in 15 kilograms of rice hulls to the mash. Rice hulls are the hard outer layers of grains of rice. They're most often used during the production of beer with high percentages of non-barley cereal grain adjuncts, such as wheat or rye. We're using wheat in this beer, and wheat has higher levels of protein and beta-glucan compared with barley, and don't have their own husks, which help with filtration. Ultimately, higher protein and beta-glucan levels mean that the wort is more viscous, which is defined as having a thick, sticky consistency between solid and liquid, having a high viscosity, and may have a harder time draining out of the bottom of the mash tun. To help improve wort drainage, rice hulls can be added as they remain stiff in the mash and help to open up channels in the grain bed to improve the speed of our wort runoff. Additionally, rice hulls don't add any flavor or color to the mash, which is why they're often used by brewers. In total, we added 1,200 liters of hot liquid for our mashing in stage. The rakes were run at full speed during the mashing in and were lowered to 1/3 of the speed for the saccharification rest. We'll leave the mash for 60 minutes to allow the starches in the malt to convert to fermentable sugars.
No day and I got no more songs left to play. Baby, 난 널 그리네. 다시 돌아와줘 내게 and let me be your man.
After 60 minutes, we'll increase the temperature to our mash out, which is 76 degrees Celsius. This will deactivate the enzymes in the mash that were converting the starches into the sugars. Once the mash out temperature of 76 degrees Celsius is reached, we'll start the Vorloff. Interestingly, for the Vorloff at Container Brewing, there's no grant or other intermediary vessel to help prevent compression of the grain bed. The wort is drained from the bottom of the mash tun and goes directly up to the top of the mash bed again to be recirculated. This helps to clarify the wort as it passes through the natural filter bed that is the grain bed. The pump is run at a controlled rate during Vorloff, as if it is run at too high a speed, it will compress the grain bed, making it difficult to separate the liquid from the solid grain. Here is the sight glass that Dave will look at to check on the clarity of the wort draining out the bottom. When he sees the wort running clear, he'll stop the Vorloff, which is about 10 minutes, and begin transferring the wort from the mash tun over to the kettle. They use a modified batch sparge process here. So what they do is transfer 9 hectoliters of wort over to the kettle. Then they'll stop the transfer process and start the sparge. So in total, 1,200 liters of 76 degrees Celsius sparge water is used. 75% of the sparge water is filled in the mash tun first. Then they'll turn on the rakes so the sparge water and grain is well mixed, and boil off again for clarity. When the wort runs clear, they'll transfer this wort over to the kettle. Then they'll sparge the remaining 25% of sparge water on top, while simultaneously transferring the wort from the mash tun to the kettle. The reason they started doing this modified batch sparge process is because they were not getting a good brewhouse efficiency. Brewhouse efficiency is a measure of the amount of extract recovered in the wort compared to the amount of extract that's actually available in the malt. It's a measure of how efficient the mashing and lautering procedures are in a brewhouse. The brewhouse efficiency here was 72% originally, and then they changed to the modified batch sparge process here. They also noticed that some of the grains were getting around the rollers in the mill, so they narrowed the opening in the mill. With these two changes, the brewhouse efficiency rose to 92%. And just to clarify, batch sparging isn't more efficient in general, but it is more efficient in this particular brewhouse system. Once all our wort is transferred over to the kettle, Dave will add firm cap to prevent foaming over. It takes the kettle 1.5 hours to fill up. Once the kettle is full, the temperature is raised to a boil. Then we'll have a 60-minute boil. While we're waiting for it to come to a boil, Dave will turn the rakes up to 20% in the mash tun. This will move the grain and force more liquid out, making the spent grain drier so it's easier to shovel out later. Dave will also take out 2 of the plates that make up the false bottom, which is the slotted bottom plate that allows the wort to drain through while keeping the grain back. He'll rinse the plates out with a hose, and he'll also flush hot water from the bottom to try and rinse out any grain that's left in the mash tun. Dave wants to pre-acidify his wort prior to putting in the lactobacillus. Acidifying the wort before adding the lactobacillus has several benefits, such as discouraging unwanted microbes that may have accidentally been introduced into the wort, and helping to prevent lactobacillus from degrading foam proteins, although both of these points have been debated. He'll add about 1.25 liters of lactic acid to lower the pH of the wort to around 4 or 4.5. The lactic acid is added during the boil. Then orange peel and 1.5 kilograms of coriander seeds, which have been coarsely blitzed in a blender, will be added during the last 8 minutes of the boil. They've been put in these muslin bags so they're easy to take in and out of the kettle.
라는 말도 못한 채 Are you fine fine 이런 말만 대문에 너가 잘 지내고 있는 거 나 알아 그냥 그 목소리가 듣고 싶은 거를 어떡해 I say I miss you but 그건 나의 실수
After that, the wort will be cooled to around 60 to 70 degrees Celsius, at which point the 12 kilograms of blueberry blossom honey will be added in. This strain of lactobacillus that Dave is using doesn't grow well in the presence of hops, which is why you'll notice that there are no hops being added to this beer. Then he'll whirlpool it for 10 minutes and then transfer the wort over to the fermenter. While Dave was doing the brewing today, his co-worker was getting the fermenter clean and ready for the beer. The first thing he'll do to clean the fermenter is hook it up to a CO2 tank. The pressure from the CO2 will push out the yeast sludge from the bottom of the fermenter. Sometimes the yeast sludge is very thick and won't push out easily, so Ben will also need to pump in some hot water to help loosen it up and push it out. Then he'll test the caustic in the caustic tank with the titration test. You'll see him doing a titration test here, but we won't go into detail about that today. The caustic was determined to be 2.5%.
보면 또 하루를 보내 오늘 같은 날 산책이라도 다녀올까 But I feel so lazy Yeah, I'm home alone all day And I got no more songs left to play Baby 난 널 그리네 다시 돌아와줘 내게 And let me be your man
After getting all the yeast sludge out and rinsing the fermenter out with hot water, Ben will set up the caustic run. His caustic run was 30 minutes long, and then he'll rinse the tank out with hot water. When it's in neutral pH, Ben will run paracetic acid through the tank for 10 minutes. Then it's ready to receive our wort. The wort is traveling from the kettle to the heat exchanger where it's cooled to 35 degrees Celsius. And then it will pass through this yeast propagator tank. This propagator is filled with 220 liters of lactobacillus bacteria culture. He'll let the lactobacillus culture sour the wort for about 2 days to lower the pH even further, to around 3.2 or 3.5. Then afterwards, he'll attach a carbonation stone to the fermenter, which he'll use to oxygenate the beer while he pitches in 220 liters of a clean ale yeast culture that was in the other yeast propagator tank. After that, the beer will ferment for another 4 to 7 days at 21 degrees Celsius, which will help clean up any off flavors in the beer. Then this beer will be crash cooled to 0 degrees Celsius to knock the yeast and other solids out of suspension, meaning that the yeast and other solids will naturally fall to the bottom of the fermenter, and Dave can simply open the bottom valve of the fermenter and remove them. Then it will be time for the beer to be transferred over to the bright tank, where it will be carbonated and readied to be canned, packaged, and sold. Well, I hope you enjoyed seeing how a sour wheat beer is made at Container Brewing. In the meantime, please support the channel by giving this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button for more brewing and distilling videos. This is Brewbird, sending good vibes your way. I'll see you next time!